What's up guys, Take Off from SGN back with another Mortal Kombat video, and this time it's going to be the 5th installment of Tales of Mortal Kombat, where we're going to be talking about Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. And this game has had kind of a bit of a mixed reaction over the years, because of course it was the very first of the 3D era. I'm going to be telling you guys all the reasons I like the game, the reasons I dislike the game, starting off with the presentation. And I gotta say, for all the things that the 3D era got wrong, there's one thing that they got absolutely perfectly, and it was the presentation in terms of the intros. I mean, the intros from Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance all the way up to Mortal Kombat Armageddon were nothing short of phenomenal. Everything about them was pretty much perfect. And Raiden explains to us that while escaping the Netherrealm, Quan Chi discovered the lost army of the Dragon King, the invincible army of the Dragon King, which essentially means that if he can bring this army back to life, he's going to be pretty much unstoppable. And the only way for him to really do that is to align himself with Shang Tsung. So he finds the sorcerer, they make a deal, they become allies, and at that point they decide that it's time to destroy the only two people that can really defeat them if they go head to head, and that is Liu Kang and Shao Kahn. They kill Shao Kahn first of all, they go on there, they fake their allegiance to him, and they murder him, and then they go over to Liu Kang. Shang Tsung shapeshifts into the body of Kung Lao, acting like he's his best friend, and then when he has his back turned, he walks up to him, and he confronts him. They start fighting, and then unfortunately for Liu Kang, Quan Chi appears behind him, hits him with a move, and at that point, he's overpowered, and Shang Tsung, something that nobody expected to possibly ever see in Mortal Kombat, Shang Tsung finally manages to get his revenge, and snaps Liu Kang's neck. In the intro. In the intro. Nobody saw that coming. And the shock value of that, and the major impact that had on the Mortal Kombat story, the Mortal Kombat universe, the Mortal Kombat history, it really does make this intro not just important, but legendary. It's iconic and it's unforgettable. Like, nobody expected the main character, essentially, of Mortal Kombat, Liu Kang, the champion of Mortal Kombat 4 times in the running, to be killed off, not just in the game, but in the intro. Nobody saw that coming, and hats off to Midway for not just taking a major risk doing that, but having the balls to not even put him in the actual game itself. Of course, they brought him back later on, but the fact that they did that, it took massive balls, and it really was a tremendous way to get people interested, because at that point, it was very repetitive. Mortal Kombat had been won 4 times in a row by Liu Kang, so them killing him off in the intro, it really was a phenomenal job, and hats off to them for doing that. As for the rest of the presentation, of course, the intro, it had pretty good graphics. Alright, I'm not going to lie. Compared to the in-game graphics, which is very normal, the graphics in the intro were actually pretty solid. Like, Liu Kang's character model looked kind of bad, but for the most part, the intro looked pretty solid. So I am going to give them credit for that. The way it was told, it was very, very dramatic. It was very awesome. So hats off to them for really nailing the intro. It was really the perfect intro. There was no way they could possibly improve that. And moving on to the main menu, I do kind of like the main menu. Of course, it's very simple, but that's fine. You know, there's nothing specifically crazy has to be done with the main menu. And the character select screen actually has some pretty solid music. Now, the main menu's music is probably the one where I have kind of an issue with, because it's not bad. It's not something that's unlistenable, but it's also completely unmemorable. It's completely forgettable, and there's just absolutely nothing about it that really speaks to you. Whereas the character select screen, where I'm not a big fan of techno. In fact, I'm not really a fan at all. I like, you know, techno, whatever it was called, the original Mortal Kombat song from the movie. I like that song just because it's hilariously perfect for Mortal Kombat, at least for the movie. And techno does work for the 90s, but overall, that's a helicopter if you could probably hear it. I'm not a huge fan of techno. I'm not a fan of it at all, really. But it kind of fits these games. You know, techno and gaming kind of they go hand in hand, especially for the late 90s and early 2000s. It just kind of fits. You know, I'm more of a rock, metal, and really rap fan, but techno in this type of situation, it does work. So I do like it, and it does have its heart. It has a soul to it, and it does kind of. It just gets you built up. It just kind of gets you motivated and ready to fight. And that's a really good thing about the music. Of course, it's not like amazing or anything like that. It's nowhere near as good as the Mortal Kombat 1, 2, or 3 music, even Mortal Kombat 4 in some ways. But still, you know, it's a decent little tune right there. So I'm not going to complain about that. The main menus, like I said, it's pretty good, but the character select screen looks good as well. Like, I really like the fact that the characters still have their own backgrounds. You know, they're not as detailed as the ones before. For example, you know, Jax in Mortal Kombat 2 had an American flag. They all had their own little background with some kind of image in the background. Whereas now in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, they only have color schemes. And that is still a fine little touch for me. I'm not going to complain about that because, of course, there was a lot more added into detail throughout the rest of the game. So it was a little bit harder for them to put detail into the backgrounds of the character select screen as well. I'm not going to complain about that. I do like the fact that the colors do add some contrast to the renders of the characters, and that is something I'm pretty happy about. When it comes to the characters, this game actually has a pretty solid roster. It's nothing special, but it's also nothing you could really complain about. It has a pretty solid mix of new and classic characters. For example, they introduced some pretty solid ones like Nitara, Kenshi, and Boraicho, which are characters that have pretty much gone on to make history in Mortal Kombat, as in well, not really Nitara, but Boraicho and Quan Chi have been pretty relevant to the story of Mortal Kombat ever since. Boraicho wasn't in Mortal Kombat 9, and he wasn't in the main roster of Mortal Kombat X, but he has always had a major role in being Liu Kang's master, having really taught him pretty much everything he knows, and possibly even having a role with Shang Tsung in the future. Regardless, Boraicho is a great character who's been in there for quite a while, and whether you love him or you hate him, he is pretty relevant to the Mortal Kombat story. And of course, we have to mention the introduction of the legendary Suhao, one of the greatest characters, not just in Mortal Kombat history, but in video game history, and I am obviously kidding, because Suhao fucking sucks. But he was still introduced in the game, and whether you like it or not, he's going to be a meme for pretty much all time, so he has to be mentioned in this. And the full roster of the game is Shang Tsung, Boraicho, Quan Chi, Li Mei, Scorpion, Sonya, Kenshi, Movado, Johnny Cage, Sub-Zero, Kano, Kung Lao, Nitara, Draman, Suhao, Frost, Jax, Kitana, Raiden, Moloch, and Cyrax. That's about 21 characters, if I counted right. And that's a pretty decent number. Like, it's not amazing, of course, but for them being their first game, like, that really started off as a main home console game with 3D era graphics, with basically being everything created from scratch and being in a 3D environment, not just fighting in a 2D scale. They pretty much changed literally everything from 1999 or whenever Mortal Kombat 4 came out to 2002. So I didn't expect them, and I do kind of, I don't really blame them for having a small roster like this, a 21 character roster. It's not a great number, but it's not a bad number as well, considering the amount of changes that they made. And overall, I like the mix of characters. Like I said, it's a pretty solid mix of classic characters and newer ones. Of course, some of them suck, like Movado and Suhao, of course, but there are a few other ones that I really like I said, Nitara, Kenshi, Boraicho. They are all good characters, so I think they did do a pretty solid job. And in general, the characters themselves don't look bad for the most part. In fact, I like a lot of the costumes. For example, I think that that Scorpion looks really good. I think that Johnny Cage looks pretty good. I don't have any beef with any of the character costumes in particular, except for two. Kung Lao, in my opinion, he just looks like the most random dude of all time in Mortal Kombat. He just has a ponytail. He just looks like basically a non-godlike Raiden, essentially, with just the most random robes of all time. So I don't particularly care for that. I think it's pretty shit, actually, that costume. And I do have to say that Sub-Zero's primary costume also really sucks. The one where he's just basically has no mask on. He's just kind of old. He has a scar. Like, the scar is fine, but he just looks old. He doesn't look like Sub-Zero that we've seen over the years. I don't like that at all. I don't like that costume at all. That one and Kung Lao's costume really, really suck. But overall, the rest of the costumes are actually pretty nice in terms of the primaries. I'm not going to go into the secondary costumes. I don't remember every single one of them. But for the most part, I don't remember any single one of them that was like extremely bad. So I'm going to go ahead and say the costumes were pretty good. So I'm not going to complain at all when it comes to the characters, the costumes, and things of that nature. When it comes to the gameplay, we have to talk about some negative things after giving pretty much nothing but praise. The gameplay for the game just simply wasn't very good. And once again, I don't blame them for that too much, because moving from 2D to 3D, just about every single thing was going to change. And after I played the game for extensively, I felt like, listen, alright, the game isn't very good in terms of gameplay, but there's plenty of room to improve, and there's plenty of room for them to really make the game fit even in 3D, if that is the route that they want to take. Unfortunately, things just kind of still stay the same moving forward. Like, Mortal Kombat Deception was a bit better, and Armageddon was basically the same thing as Deception in terms of fighting. It was a small improvement in Deception, but realistically, there was nothing to really make it feel like it was an actual Mortal Kombat game. And like I wrote on my notes right here, it actually feels like more like a Tekken with a Mortal Kombat palette swap than it does an actual Mortal Kombat game. And that is probably the biggest issue that the 3D era had, because yes, the characters were there, yes, the storylines were there, but it just didn't feel like Mortal Kombat. It just didn't feel like it. And that's the biggest issue with Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, I would say, is that the gameplay wasn't very good, and it felt like a pretty poor version of Tekken with the Mortal Kombat palette swap. It didn't feel very good, and that was probably the biggest issue, like I said, with the game. And they did try to do a few things. Like, they did try to introduce a system with different fighting styles. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that kind of just watered it down. For example, right, it feels like they added two fighting styles, in my opinion. I'm not an expert in fighting games, simply to hide the fact that there was really no depth to the system. For example, each character had like 3 or 4 combos that you could do, and you could kind of mix them together in some way. But really, the combos were nothing special. It was pretty much just the same thing every single time, over and over again, where you could kind of mix them in with the other fighting style. And it just didn't really feel cool. Like, in my opinion, like I said, I'm not an expert in fighting games. I'm actually just trying to dive in now to really learning the mechanics with Killer Instinct. I'm trying to find myself, like, really understanding what goes down when it comes to depth to fighting games, because I haven't really known that for quite a while. I haven't really been that deep in terms of fighting game mechanics, whereas I have been deep in Mortal Kombat lore. That's what I thrive on when it comes to Mortal Kombat, not really the gameplay. And like I said, I'm not really an expert in it, so I might be wrong about this, but it just kind of feels like they were hiding the fact that the fight mechanics weren't very deep, and that there were a lot of issues with it. And like I mean, it's an interesting idea, I guess, but overall the execution was pretty poor. I didn't like it at all. I would have preferred to have a more detailed and a deeper fighting style, one per character, than having 2 that were kind of just, I don't know, it just didn't really feel right. And a lot of times the characters also shared different fighting styles, especially like in Mortal Kombat Deception and Mortal Kombat Armageddon, where there were more characters. A lot of them shared the same fighting style. So really, you would learn one character, and you would go to a different character. You could just pretty much have their moveset in the same exact way, just learning the special moves for the other character if they had the same fighting style. You could just main that one fighting style. So that kind of sucked in a lot of ways. And in my opinion, it was a pretty poor addition. It was an interesting idea in theory, but the execution and really the result of it on paper was simply not satisfactory in my opinion. And like I said, there were some interesting additions to the game. For example, the first edition of Conquest Mode. Like, I don't have any particular nice things to say about the Conquest Mode in this game, apart from the fact that it was a pretty nice way to learn some story elements. Essentially, in this game, not really having a story mode, and of course having the classic arcade character endings and things of that nature, the only way to really learn things from the story was to play the arcade mode, finish the arcade ending, or do the Conquest Mode, which gave you a bit more story, because every time you would finish a challenge, it would give you a little piece of information about what was going on with that specific character's storyline, essentially. And that was interesting. Unfortunately, it felt kind of like a chore, and after a while, it just kind of got boring and repetitive. And of course, you were always doing, different challenges. It just never really felt that fun to do, at least in my opinion. I know that there's a lot of people out there that enjoyed that Conquest Mode, and I really loved it, but in my opinion, it was probably the most boring of the 3 Conquest Modes that have come out since then. And really, it was interesting, and if you're a guy who loves the lore like I do, then it was worth it. But if you're somebody who doesn't really care about the lore, and is just trying to enjoy the game, and not really trying to go deep in the game, because the Conquest Mode did kind of give you a good idea of how to go deep in the character's mechanics, but realistically, if you're not a big fan of the lore, and you don't really care about being really good at a specific character, or you don't want to do this tedious challenges and you just want to practice on your own, then the mode definitely wasn't worth it. Other than that, if you like the lore, then yes, and even if you are trying to be good at the character, then possibly. But realistically, it was an okay mode, nothing special, and there's really nothing to write home about when it comes to that. The story, however, as I mentioned about the intro, is actually really interesting. I enjoy the story quite a bit. I love the fact that Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, 2 of the most powerful villains in Mortal Kombat, of course, the Shang Tsung and Quan Chi are really some of the only villains in Mortal Kombat if you look at the sub-bosses, main bosses. Anyway, regardless, they're very, very powerful villains. They continue to get more and more powerful, more and more relevant. So the fact that they were able to find an alliance, which of course was eventually going to fail, which we'll get into in a future video, the fact they were able to form an alliance and go after and kill Shao Kahn and kill Liu Kang, it was just such an amazing turn of events that really nobody expected. And I was absolutely shocked when I saw that happen. And the way things moved forward, it really felt like something really big was about to happen. Even if it wasn't just in Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, like something that was going to happen in future games, it just felt great. It felt like something amazing was about to happen, something very big. And it really was a solid way to move the series forward. And I like a lot of the things that happen between specific characters. For example, Johnny Cage becoming the champion of the Elder Gods, Liu Kang dying, Raiden relinquishing his identity as an Elder God to become, once again, just a regular, protector of Earthrealm, going that he can fight and help the Earthrealm warriors defend themselves from the Deadly Alliance. That was just such a phenomenal turn of events there. There were so many great storylines in there, and in my opinion, they did a very, very good job of executing the story and really progressing this franchise as a series. And really, there's so many good things about it. It's kind of a shame that a lot of these storylines were never really finished. Like, they promised they would finish them out in Armageddon, but that never happened. But I can't leave that kind of blame on this game in particular. All right, Mortal Kombat Armageddon is a separate game. All the issues it has is a separate thing. And Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance has its pros, it has its cons. But overall, in my opinion, the game is actually a pretty solid one. Now, like, finishing off with the story before I get into my final thoughts, I have to say the idea of essentially two different ways that you can actually learn the story. Apart from the intro, because that's something that doesn't really count. That takes place before the game, not during the game. But the fact that there's two ways you can finish the arcade mode with whatever character you want to use, and you can find out their ending, which of course is really non-canon for a lot of them. Sometimes they are canon, or at least some elements are canon, whereas a lot of them just simply are just fake. They aren't really relevant to the future of the series. They're just something there to, like, a what-if scenario, essentially, as Taplock puts it. And the arcade endings, of course, are always a fun way to learn it. And the addition of Conquest Mode as an alternative way to figure out more things about the story, it was a welcome thing. It's just unfortunate, as I said, that mode was kind of boring. It was kind of like a chore. So it wasn't great. But, of course, the fact that there were different ways you could find out about the story, and there was just more story to the game that was appreciated. And overall, like I said, I like the story of the game, and I really do like the story elements of it. And going into my final thoughts, it was always very difficult. It was always going to be very difficult for Midway to go from a 2D era to a 3D era. Making 2D games where you're fighting on a single 2D plane, where every character, for the most part, can have their own moves and things of that nature. It was always going to be very difficult from moving to that to moving into a 3D space, having to add so many different mechanics, having to figure out so many different gameplay issues that they were going to have. It was always going to be very difficult. However, they did execute it pretty well. I'm not going to say it was a phenomenal game. I'm not even going to say it was a really great game, but it was a good game. Like, if you get past the fact that the gameplay isn't phenomenal, you get past the fact that it's not very deep, and it does kind of seem like they were just hiding behind the separate, two separate fighting style system. If you get away from that, the game is actually pretty fine. If you're able to just enjoy the game for what it is when it comes to gameplay, experience it for what it is, have fun with some friends, then it's fine. The story is really good in the game, and I have to say the presentation is simply phenomenal. Like, they did a very phenomenal job in this game with presentation, not necessarily with the menus, but the character select screen was pretty good, and most important, the intro. The intro was just phenomenal. It was a truly great job that they did there, and it really was, in my opinion, one of the things that really set Deadly Alliance apart from possibly Mortal Kombat Armageddon. I don't think it was as good as Deception, like, not even close. But I think that in terms of 3D era, this is probably up there alongside Armageddon in terms of how good it was. Like, everything about it was pretty solid in terms of story, in terms of what they were able to do with it, moving from 3D to 2D, except for the gameplay. So I do like the game. Not a great game, but it was a pretty solid one, especially if you take a look at it. Like, if you consider this as a Mortal Kombat game, then of course you have to look at it compared to so many great games, and it just kind of drops in terms of how good you think the game is. But if you look at it as a separate thing, then it's definitely a really good game if it was any other franchise other than Mortal Kombat. But being a Mortal Kombat game, much like Mortal Kombat 4, it doesn't live up to the standards of all the other ones, but it is a pretty decent game, and one that if you pop in every once in a while, just to get that nostalgia going, and just to enjoy yourself for like an hour or two, then you will find some satisfaction there. And it's not a great game, but it is a pretty fun one. So that is it for this video, guys. I want you to let me know in the comment section down below what you think of Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Did you like it? Did you think it was trash? What elements of the game did you like? Which ones did you think were trash? Let me know these things in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button and share it. That's extremely helpful. And if you want to see more of my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell. That will be notified every single time a video comes out. Once again, guys, thank you so much to every single one of my subscribers, every single one of you guys that continues to comment. In particular, my boy Deejus Johnson, who comments on almost all my videos. And once again, we don't get along. We don't agree on every single thing, but I respect the hell out of your opinion. You are very knowledgeable about Mortal Kombat, and that's pretty much all I want. Knowledgeable people in my community talking to me so we can have a discussion about Mortal Kombat, and that's really what matters to me. It's not about the views. It's not about money that would be coming in. It's about having nice discussions about sports, about Mortal Kombat, and really having a community built here. So thank you so much to every single one of you guys, in particular my boy Johnson. I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.